Let's bring in Louise Radnofsky, White House reporter for our corporate cousin, the Wall Street Journal. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So the president first came out and said that Roy Moore should step down. Remember when the allegations were new? If the allegations were true, he believed he should step down. But now he's changed his tune a bit. He says he believes him. Are you surprised?
Well, the White House has walked a very careful line on this. The most important message I think that we heard from the president yesterday was that in his eyes, maintaining a Republican majority in the Senate was going to take precedence over everything else. They'd left themselves a little bit of room to end up in that position by specifying that they only wanted to see Roy Moore step down if the allegations were proven to be true. And obviously, as you saw, by yesterday, the president had reached his own conclusion, at any rate, that that wasn't the case, and therefore he could continue to both somewhat implicitly argue for Mr. Moore and more directly argue against the candidacy of Doug Jones.
It's unfortunate to have to politicize these sexual allegations. However, politics are politics. And with that, the Democratic candidate, when you look at Doug Jones's record, not exactly glowing either. And unfortunately for the GOP, there's no time to find a replacement for Roy Moore, which is maybe why, I guess that's what led the president to say this yesterday about Moore's opponent. I want you to listen.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat. Jones, I've looked at his record. It's terrible in crime. It's terrible in the border. It's terrible in the military. I can tell you for a fact, we do not need somebody that's going to be bad on crime, bad on borders, bad with the military, bad for the Second Amendment.
So let me get this straight. Bad on crime, bad on the Second Amendment, bad on terrorism. So when weighing the cons between an alleged pedophile and a Democrat, the alleged pedophile wins.
Well, what you're hearing from Doug Jones is a lot of talk on the campaign trail, primarily about his record or his willingness to side with Democrats on kitchen table issues such as health care. He has, in the last couple of days, interestingly, leaned more towards mentioning the allegations against Mr. Moore, first in an ad that focused on other Republicans' condemnation of Mr. Moore, and more recently focusing on the accusers and highlighting the accusations that they brought against Mr. Moore.
Right. You know, it's interesting. We just heard an interview with Roy Moore, and he was talking about lawsuits, potential lawsuits, and defamation lawsuits. Look, you know, if these accusations and these allegations, to be perfectly fair, turn out to be false, let's say hypothetically speaking, there's no evidence to back them up. The question is, does he have a case? Because in an interview, he says, you know, the Washington Post, #1, and then the women involved. If for some reason it is found to be all untrue, and he says it takes time to get proof, does he sue?
Well, you've certainly heard the Washington Post say that it stands very vigorously behind its reporting. I think the other thing that you would want to bear in mind is that you did hear some of this echoed in what the president was saying yesterday, too. He certainly decided to make a point in weighing in on the veracity of these allegations in which he essentially said that they hadn't come out before now, and that Mr. Moore had been a fairly controversial and well-known candidate for a number of decades. And so in that sense, that's where the president fell down on that issue. You've heard from the Washington Post, and what you're hearing from a lot of folks in Alabama is that, and indeed outside of Alabama and Washington, is that they essentially want to leave this to Alabama voters to decide.
All right, Louise Radnofsky, thank you very much.
Thank you.